I want to talk broadly about what can be done, and in fact, who should do it to defeat this vicious equity mantra and equity ideology that is infecting the American campus, but it's also infecting our society generally. Now, I was looking at some of the briefs that are being presented or filed in the Harvard case. This is the Supreme Court taking up the issue of affirmative action. And you begin to see what's going on and sort of how disturbing it is. So, if Harvard were to adopt a purely merit-based admissions policy, which is to say, if Harvard were to be colorblind, not really look at the race or ethnicity of the applicant, just really look at their grades, look at their test scores, look at their academic preparation, and decide based on that. Well, according to this documentation presented to the court, if they did that, if Harvard were colorblind, over 50% of the admitted students would be Asian American. Wow. 51.7% to be specific. And similarly, what is the Asian American population of Harvard now? 24%. So the Asian American population of Harvard would double. And this group, Asian Americans, which are 6-7% of the population, would nevertheless be half of the Harvard student body. Again, this is not because they're discriminating or they've got a history of looking down on other people. This is all nonsense. It's purely because the Asian Americans have better grades, better test scores, work harder, study harder, stronger family values, put a higher importance on education. These are the cultural and behavioral factors that explain why Asian Americans are in this, well, not privileged in the sense of fortunate, but earned position. Now we turn to the share of whites. Whites are currently 37.6% of the Harvard student body. And if there was a colorblind policy, the number of whites, the proportion of whites would be, well, about the same. In fact, it would go down very slightly from 37.6 to 35.5. So interestingly, we see that affirmative action here is not having a dramatic effect on the proportion of whites at least Harvard and perhaps also at other colleges. The Hispanic share would drop significantly from 14.9%, which is where it is now, to, 2.7%. I mean, this is just a tremendous. So essentially what would happen, and the black share, unbelievable, would vanish from the current share, 15.8%, to 0.9%. Blacks would be less than 1% at Harvard on the basis of merit. So you can see here both what a true meritocracy would produce, but you can also see why the Harvard officials would be embarrassed by that kind of a result. In fact, it almost seems to be a result that would give fodder to racists. They'd be like, wait. Although racists can't take too much comfort from all this. Why? Because, racists always like to say, well, the white people are the smartest. They're the greatest. They should be on top. And obviously no racist would want to say, well, the smartest people are actually the Asian Americans. They're first. Whites maybe second. Hispanics maybe third. So racist satisfaction in this outcome would have to be moderated or ambivalent. But the point I'm trying to make is that the sheer embarrassment of these institutions of having a very small, in the case of blacks, almost negligible number of blacks, in the case of Hispanics, still at a very small, under 3%. This is why they do all this racial engineering. This is why they're into this big equity thing. And the way that they push the equity thing is that they have this idea that every racial group should roughly approximate. It's like in the absence of discrimination, we expect, and this is of course the preposterous premise, false premise, by the way, in the absence of discrimination, we would expect each racial group to fan out into Harvard and other elite colleges at roughly its proportion in the surrounding population. Now, why is this a foolish assumption? The reason is that groups perform differently. I'm not saying that this is due to some intrinsic factor. It could be due to cultural, behavioral, who knows, all kinds of factors. It's kind of like asking, why is it the case that Indian Americans in the United States, why is it the case that so many of them are doctors? Why is it the case that so many of them are engineers? Why is it the case that so many own motels stretching across the Midwest? Why do so many Indian Americans have Indian restaurants? Well, look, there are explanations for all those things. But the idea that, Indian Americans should be present at roughly their proportion on the basketball court and Jews should be present at roughly their proportion in farming, this is all a certain kind of crazy talk. But it's the kind of crazy talk that is now respectable in academia. I think that while I'm happy to see a number of states passing laws about critical race theory and so on, it's really the Supreme Court's job here to step in on the basis of the 14th Amendment. Equal rights under the law is one of the core principles of America. I mean, it was there from the beginning. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence, but it was constitutionally affirmed in the 14th Amendment. And what the Supreme Court needs to do, this is probably one of the best things that they can do, this 6-3, this 5-4, this conservative Supreme Court, is strike down this stupid doctrine of proportional representation and restore the idea. In fact, it's the Martin Luther King idea that we ought to be judged on our merits as individuals.